Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it's Sunday, July the 6th, 2025. Yesterday we did our weekly tech roundup with my old friend Keith Tier of That Was the Week. This week he talked, not for the first or the last time, about what he calls an AI gold rush, but he did say something rather interesting. He said that AI is not just changing everything, but it's not just another wave, it's a phase shift. We're writing from Silicon Valley, where terms like phase shift mean something, but we know what he meant. He meant it's a revolution, it's changing everything. And who better to tell us about this profound change than one of Britain's great novelists, Ewan Morrison, one of my old friends. He has a brand new book out, as it happens, coincidentally, on AI. It's called For Emma. And Ewan is joining us from Glasgow. Is it sunny in Glasgow, Ewan? Does the sun ever come out? I know that's a stupid joke.
Never. No. It's the only place in the world where global warming isn't actually happening at the moment. So it's endlessly raining in summer. Yeah, that's part.
I've given you a new phrase, Ewan, for your next book. Phase shift. What does that mean? I mean, we all know kind of what it means. And is that what your new book For Emma is about? I hope you don't use that term for phase shift.
Phase shift. That sounds to me like nothing burger. That's just one of these big hype phrases. So I think a lot of the writing that I do on my Substack and in print is very different from what's in the novel. So I'm very critical of the language of Silicon Valley and of the element of hype and pure science fiction that gets spun out around the AI industries. I've seen how a lot of sci-fi ideas like the singularity have come to become common parlance within Silicon Valley, and people talk about them as if they're real, as if AGI is real, as if the very fact of talking about them will bring them to manifest magically through the pseudoscience of hyperstition. So my work of fiction, For Emma, which is about AI, it's really about an entirely different aspect of AI, which is the Neuralink project and the idea that we can grow.
That's I was going to say,
right.
Ewan Musk, Elon Musk. I'm not confusing you, of course. Elon Musk's Neuralink, where what happens very, very simply, Ewan, we get somebody else's brain.
No, we just was the 6 companies that are involved in these processes of mapping the brain and getting signals from the brain. 3 of them, including Bezos's company, are involved in invasive surgical implants, usually short-term in nature and experimental. And they are certainly with Neuralink, with Musk's Neuralink, it's about implanting a microchip about an inch and a half into your head with lots of trodes that go out to pick up electronic signals within the brain. And the plan is, or it's been tested rather, they've had about 6 test subjects, human test subjects, that it can give powers back to people who've lost the ability to speak, lost the ability to move limbs, and that these things can be done remotely. That's the plan in stage 1, but you hear Elon Musk talking about it, and he says we're going to move from therapeutics to augmentation, human augmentation, at which point it becomes part of the grand fantasy, which is the transhumanist project. And so my book really picks up on the point where Neuralink brain chip technology has taken off, and a girl called Emma undergoes the brain chip process and dies. It kills her. and blows out her brain, as it were. We don't know whether it's before or after she's uploaded herself or not, if that's even possible. But a year later, her father seems to hear her voice, and her voice seems to be telling them to commit an act of vengeance against the corporate CEO of the big tech company who was responsible for the brain chip experiments. So that's really what.
Yeah. So some people might say that sounds a little science fictional, but in preparing for our conversation today, I browsed our friend the internet, and I found on the front page of CNN
Yep.
piece about a man who says that ChatGPT, which is leading AI technology algorithm now, sparked a spiritual awakening. Here, his wife says it threatens their marriage. This isn't the first or the last type of article about this, where we believe that these AIs are sentient. And in fact, there was a Google person who believed that what he was inventing was sentient, and he got fired.
Yeah, that's right, because this is the Eliza effect. This goes back to the 60s. This is the innate human failing for projecting.
Sorry to jump in at you, and there's so much to say. You're a novelist. This is your first piece of quote unquote science fiction. But is that the right word now? I know you're indebted in many ways to the classic science fiction novels, everything from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde to H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau. But none of the stuff was happening in their age. Now we have real stuff. So is Emma a traditional novel in a sense? Would you call it science fiction?
Well, I wouldn't call it science fiction because I've always worked within the realist vein, but I think now what's happened is that we're now living within a world that's dominated by narratives of science fiction. And the AI industries are themselves industries that have grown from trying to manifest science fiction ideas. So in talking about Silicon Valley, one invariably ends up entering into the world of sci-fi that these people live by anyway. So I see it as a realist novel set a couple of years in the future, not very far, at a point where Neuralink technology is much more advanced, at a point where there's a different way of achieving AI, not through the large language models, which I don't think are going to lead us to, human level intelligence at all. So it's really a book about a world that's become consumed by the fictions of science. Yeah.
In one of your interesting pieces from a couple of years, actually from May of this year, you on Unheard, you wrote about the cruelty of tech utopianism. Human suffering isn't progress. But some people might say, what's so cruel about Neuralink? It's saving people who are disabled, implanting new networks, neurons into their mind or brain so that they can walk again or think again or feel again. What's so cruel about that?
Well, we just have to look at what the ultimate objectives of the accelerationists and the transhumanists are. They're not to help people with disabilities. They're to wheel out large-scale chipping and experimentation on this merger of the human brain, which they consider to be a machine, with AI systems. So I think for that to happen at a certain point in the future, there's going to have to be large-scale live human testing. Certainly, if we're going to reach the benchmark which Elon Musk talked about, which was in 10 years, he said there will be 1 million people who've been neurologically chipped. And that won't be to do with helping people with disabilities. That will be a larger plan to create data-fused humans that are in some ways enhanced by the technology or dependent on the technology.
Well, what's wrong with that? Why is that cruel? I assume every kind of major medical breakthrough has required human testers. I mean, everything from cancer research to new limbs. I mean, why is that essentially cruel?
Well, if you look at the number of animals that have been killed to get to the point where we can conduct these experiments on 6 people, There are 1,500 animals were killed so far within those tests. I'm extrapolating from where we are now to a point in the future where I think that there is a moral black hole in the tech accelerationist project. It's what's called long-termism, right? So you posit a great goal in the future, like the conquest of Mars, whatever, the colonization of Mars, and then you make the sacrifices that are necessary along the way to reach that point. I imagine we'll be pulling out of the Mars project after 5 people are sacrificed in a rocket that blows up. It won't take much more than that. The accelerationists might have great noble goals, but they tend to overlook the degree of human sacrifice that's involved to get there. And I think we will be seeing, because there's such a lack of regulation within human testing anyway, we've only got the Helsinki Protocol to use as a weapon against live human testing. And because there's such a history with biotech companies using human subjects, say in the third world, over the last 20 or 30 years, I can imagine, and it's what I foresee within the novel, is that there's a lot of illegal testing going on within the story of humans being implanted with these technologies, and the results of those experiments being hidden from the rest of the public.
Someone from Silicon Valley, I'm not sure Elon Musk would come on this show, but people like him might argue, well, there's always a need for sacrifice. A discovery comes to mind, the discovery of the so-called New World of the Americas required many tens of thousands of dead people. Why should we be against the idea of sacrifice, Ewan, if it is in the name of human progress? Do you reject that entirely? Does that mean that we just have to, it's the old argument, well, then you could have just stayed in your cave and you would never have had electricity, you would have never had the wheel, you'd never have had firearms, you'd never have had democracy.
I know, but these are the standard accelerationist arguments to justify everything.
They're not but no, I disagree with that. They're not accelerationist, because you're collapsing accelerationism into anyone who believes in any element of progress. Those are two different things, aren't they?
No, not really. I'm just going by the jargon that I hear on X by the tech boys, who anytime you raise any ethical issues at all, they'll come up with like, oh, well, you'll go back to your cave then and not have any electricity. I think this is a reductionist way of looking at things. Another way to look at things, and I think this is probably going to be what happens, is that you will have a massive deceleration within the tech project when AI fails to live up to the predicted large goals that it's got. That shifts the worldview entirely, because in a sense you're talking about the manifestation of a big idea somewhere in the future justifies all these sacrifices in the exponential curve of progress, as we're always being told. The fact is that tech fails a lot of the time by itself, not due to anyone saying, hold on, stop, slow down, the sacrifices will be too great. Tech collapses, and we're currently within probably the beginning of the third AI winter, if people are aware of what that means, which is a point where a promise that's made about AI technology fails, and then the markets respond to that by pulling money out of it. I think we may see that actually it's not people like me standing up against AI that cause AI to collapse. It's its own failures.
Yeah, there's a great deal of hysteria about AI. I mentioned to you before we went live, I saw the latest Mission Impossible film, which is supposed to be about, according to the Washington Post, our AI doomsday fears, but there was no AI in it. What's your take then on the current state? We've done, as you know, lots and lots of shows on AI. We recently had Emily Bender, Alex Hanna on who are the authors of quite an influential book, The AI Con, How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want. Before talking about the future we want, is this hype? I mean, is the current AI revolution, is Keith Teare wrong to describe it as a phase shift, as a profound change in the nature of things?
Well, I think you just have to break it down and look at AI from a PR perspective and see what we were promised. We were promised human-level AI by Marvin Minsky in 1970 in an article he did in the in Life magazine, and he said within 3 to 8 years we will have human level artificial intelligence. And then, of course, there was the first AI winter where DARPA pulled its funding, and private venture capital pulled its funding as well. And there was a 5-year gap there where there was no research in AI; it was discredited. And then, of course, there was the expert systems kicked in within the 80s. And that was a new way of reaching AI that we were told. And again, the same claims were made that human level intelligence was just around the corner. And again, that collapsed through hype, through over projected goals, ridiculous goals on ridiculous timelines. And again, DARPA pulled funding, and the British government also pulled funding. 300 AI companies collapsed in the second AI winter. And there was a 10-year gap then before AI researchers could get their financing back to undertake what's really a return to one of the models from the 1960s. Chatbots were really developed in the 1960s. So I think we're seeing the same cycle happening again. There's been
So for you, it's hype. It's not real.
It's hype. It's hype. And if you look at the things that have been attempted, okay, we were talking 2 years ago about emergence, right? There was emergence and scaling, and both of those things have failed, right? And then there was reasoning models, and they failed as well. And now there's, even this week, people are talking about how agents don't actually work either. So there's no pathway for large language models to reach human level intelligence, as Jan LeCun, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, as from Meta has been telling us for the last 6 months. No pathway to human level intelligence. So it's really a repeat of the same two patterns that we've had before since the 1970s. It's a massive hype machine with a lot of cope and a lot of kicking the can down the road and a lot of moving the goalposts so that we don't actually get to make an assessment of how much these systems are actually failing.
I was a little naughty, and on Google, on their Gemini, I entered an AI summary of your book, and it seemed to me reasonable. I mean, it was coherent. If I was just reading it fast, I wouldn't probably think it was written by a machine. What do you make of that? Is that hype too? I mean, did you use ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude to help you refine your argument or point out grammatical or structural problems with your new book for Emma?
No, but I've done tests to the very limits of what these systems can do. I played a little trick on ChatGPT last year, where I asked it to list the 12 books that I'd written, knowing full well that I've only written 9. And it filled in the numbers for me, because these systems are always very keen to get you to do that. So one of the books it said I'd written was one called Birth of a Nation, which is the great, racist classic film from the 1920s. Another one is... It said I'd written a book called 9 Inches Pleases a Lady, which is a story of a pornographic poem, the title of a pornographic poem by Robert Burns. So it had established that Robert Burns was from Scotland and that I was from Scotland, and that in the past I had written some erotic books, and I'd put these two things together. So that then became the truth, if you like, that ChatGPT had said about my writing. So not...
we should change the headline. 9 Inches doesn't please a writer, Ewan.
Well, I actually asked it for a synopsis of what this non-existent book was, and it came back in seconds with a synopsis of a non-existent book called 9 Inches Pleases a Lady, in which it cobbled together the stories of the Full Monty and Billy Elliot to create a sort of Irving Welsh style Edinburgh story of a stripper who's got to come out of the closet.
Did you tell your friend Irving Welsh about it? I know he's a big fan of your work, particularly this novel. I mean, from a novelist's point of view, is this necessarily a bad thing? It sounds like fun. What's the harm in that?
Well, I mean, the main thing is I've also done tests with 3 different companies who said that they can write, that large language models can write novels. Yeah. I mean, I think, they're fine for working with existing ideas and brainstorming around, say, an existing IP, but they cannot write novels, no matter You sometimes hear some of the AI doomers, in fact, talking about how AI can now write novels. Oh, isn't this a disaster? And I go, well, hold on a second. They actually can't. I've seen 3 tests from 3 different companies, and what they tend to do, these agentic models that piece together fragments of different programs and different attempts to understand a text, is they tend to do sort of collages of synopsis and then just squeeze in a lot of similes and metaphors. So they're also unable to hold on to the notion of a protagonist.
It's filling. In other words, it requires real novelists like yourself to point it out. So are you suggesting in the book and in your argument that technology like Neuralink, which is different from AI, that is a real threat? There isn't going to be a Neuralink winter, that is on the horizon, and it's particularly dangerous?
Well, I think we just have to uphold the Helsinki protocols on human experimentation and live human subjects. There has to be consent if people are willing to risk their lives for these technologies. And there has to be international agreement, just as we would have on landmines, or on, as we should have on gain of function internationally. We should have an international agreement on that. America's leading the way with that just now. I think it's a danger. I think it needs to be. I think brain chip technology needs to be reined in. I know, for example, that the Neuralink experiments had some troubles gaining evidence from Elon Musk's company, which is when they were investigating the deaths of the 1,500 animals, whether they'd been killed humanely. It turned out they had not. There was some talk about surgical glue being squeezed into brains to try to hold the trodes in place. There's been a fairly thorough investigation that you can find in the newspaper.
That does not sound very
it's
edifying. I wonder, Ewan,
well,
whether
I mean,
we're going
just remember that that great Silicon Valley go fast break things. When the things are human beings, when the goal is like we will achieve a fusion of humans and machines and give humans superpowers, it sounds incredible. We're like, wow, we'll make any sacrifices we need. But when it's a dirty operating table with surgical glue being squeezed into your skull as electronic trodes have shaken themselves loose from deep in your brain, and you're being able to fed intravenous drugs to try and stop the infections that are affecting your brain matter, then it starts to become a different story entirely.
I wonder whether we will be thinking out loud here, proverbial frogs in the boiling water, where it won't start with our brains. It will start with chips in our fingers so that we can tell the time, chips in our eyes so that we can always be on social media. Will it start, or is it starting with the brain? I mean, you obviously have something like Neuralink, but the logic of implanting, I mean, post smartphones, we still don't quite know what a post smartphone is, although Sam Altman is working on some sort of AI device with the guy who invented the iPhone. Will we see the chip begin to colonize the body, just as the Europeans, to discover the Americas, they had to find the West Indies, probably Iceland and elsewhere? It's going to take a bit of time.
I think it really depends on how young people, adapt to this technology. If you listen to accelerationists, they'll tell you that every technology is good and every technology will manifest. But when you look at the track record of actually recent technological wheelouts, they've been pretty poor, like the metaverse, for example. That was just embarrassing, and it was laughed out of existence by the general public, as were Zuckerberg's, virtual reality 3D glasses as well. So I think one of the biggest defenses we have against widespread human chipping is whether young people think it's cool or not, and whether young people think it's completely crap or not. They might just go, I don't want to give away all my data. I don't want my parents spying on me because I've got a chip in my body. We shall see. I mean, things tend towards adoption as a mode for new technologies with young people.
I don't know if you've looked at what Sam Altman's doing with technology in the eye, which he's merging with cryptocurrency to give quote unquote free money to anyone that agrees to have a chip implanted in their eye so that he will know everyone and everything. It's an interesting model.
Well, I mean, I think the way that AI survived the second AI winter was by just moving directly into military funding. And I think that's exactly what OpenAI is going to do. When the return of investment from consumers just doesn't come in, Altman's already one of the 4 benefactors of massive, American government military funding, and he'll probably develop that within the military. Whether we see a wheel out of eye technology, eye implants down the line is a different matter, but no doubt they'll be experimenting on soldiers as this is wheeled out. But I think it's increasingly hard to draw a line really between military AI and civilian AI, as we're seeing with the coziness that companies like Palantir and OpenAI have with the American government.
You mentioned Palantir, OpenAI, Zuckerberg, you mentioned Facebook, of course, or Meta. You're in Glasgow, and obviously those guys are on the west coast of the US, mostly in the Bay Area. How do you do your research? How do you keep up to date with what's happening in Silicon Valley? Did you spend any time in California to write for Emma, or is this an imaginary project?
No, it's a product of globalization. It's we've all seen the TED Talks that have given by these people, the interviews that they give. I don't think sitting in a room with them is really going to make much difference. They have a particular mode of address, a language, a way of talking to each other. And once you've cracked that, you're really in their world as such. Yeah, but you do remind people that this is a work of fiction, and works of fiction as well are warnings. If you look at Huxley's Brave New World, Huxley was actually very close to eugenics, because his brother Julian Huxley was one of the founders of the Eugenics Society. But Huxley himself stepped back from that to create the work of fiction, which is the more lasting depiction of eugenics as a future projected society in Brave New World.
Yeah, it's interesting that in the case of Huxley, of course, you could read Brave New World also as a critique of American consumerist society. He spent the last part of his life after he wrote Brave New World in California. We've all seen the film, of course, Ewan being John Malkovich, where we literally get to travel within somebody else. Would you like to travel in one of these people, in a Musk or a Zuckerberg?
I don't think it would be a particularly deep travel, to be honest. You'd end up with the Malkovich thing, be like Zuckerberg. I think there's a particular mindset in Silicon Valley. Should we call it left-brained, as Ian McGilchrist would call it? Very object-focused, a very spreadsheet and mechanistic way of looking at the world. And I think the way that artists look at the world tends to be much richer, deeper, and to understand, or at least explore, elements of the subconscious. I think part of the problem that we see in the world is that the left-brained vision of the world as calculable, as solvable. This is the sort of Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel vision of the world as a fully mapped place, which can be controlled to a certain degree, or certainly within their plans. The idea of a planned and mapped world, the world of the dataists, is a terrifying place for artists. It's a shallow vision of what human beings really are.
Haven't we been having this argument, though, for the last couple of 100 years? I mean, Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism is basically no different from Andreessen or Thiel or Musk or Zuckerberg.
Agreed.
And of course, the reaction of conservative romantics against Benthamite utilitarianism defined much of the 19th century, and particularly much of the poetry and literature of the 19th century. Do you see yourself, in a sense, Ewan, as an inheritor of that
as a
intellectual struggle.
as a conservative romantic.
Are you a
Well,
conservative romantic,
I'm certainly a romantic. Yeah.
but not a conservative?
Well, I believe in conserving things that have value, but at the moment, it seems to be no one who's pushing the AI agenda more than the MAGA camp and who would traditionally be conservatives. I think the bigger issue here is that you can't actually, one side or the other can't win forever in this, because the utilitarians versus the romantics, or the accelerationists versus the decelerationist, or the Luddites, whatever, or the left side of the brain versus the right side of the brain, the planning side versus the artistic side. We're never going to solve this. But what will happen will be there will be periods in history where one side takes dominance over the other. So, for example, we saw the results of Bentham's beliefs in utilitarianism spread through the upper classes and through Europe, and led to surveillance societies. Bentham created the panopticon, as you yourself in one of your books explored so brilliantly.
And his brother worked for Catherine the Great.
Right. So we ended up with panopticon surveillance societies as a result of the utilitarian vision. That collapsed with the collapse of communism and the defeat of fascism. We had a period of, if you like, romantic, artistic, free-for-all capitalism without a plan, which was the 80s, 90s, up to the 2000s. And now we are seeing the return of the utilitarian mindset once again with the new technologies enabled by AI. And the notion of the planned society is coming back this time, not necessarily on the left as it did the first time around.
Yeah, I wish we had a good autobiography, and not autobiography. That's a contradiction in terms, unless we used AI. A good biography of Jeremy Bentham. He's such an important figure, and everyone seems to have missed him. What about the argument, Ewan, about using the electricity? I mean, much of the fear of 19th century conservative romantics, and I'm not saying you are one, but the people who reacted against Benthamite utilitarianism, was rooted in the consequence of electricity and the machine, the engine. One could argue, I mean, that was real, and we have had the Industrial Revolution. It certainly hasn't been ideal by any means, but in some ways, it's benefited humanity. I mean, you keep on falling back on accelerationists. Can one be in the middle of the road here, excusing the pun, Ewan, and not get run over, not be roadkill? Can we accept that some areas of technology are actually good for us as individuals and collectively as a
well,
species?
I don't know what use that is to us to talk in such vast abstractions, because I don't think anybody other than the Unabomber is actually talking about getting rid of technology completely. I think it's better to focus on actual specifics as to where the technologies are leading us, and the technologies that we see promoted by the World Economic Forum and also the accelerationists, also Peter Thiel and these people. These are surveillance technologies merging the power of the state with the military to draw up predictive patterns on human behavior. We have predictive policing already in Holland, where Shades of Minority report there, where you can be put on lists for crimes you're likely to commit. We have surveillance technologies which are being experimentally tested in Gaza just now, with forced facial recognition at the camps where people pick up food, which is Peter Thiel and Palantir, which we could see wheeled out within our own countries through the IRS, through the taxation system. Facial recognition, body mapping, people mapping, and people planning. So these are very real technologies that are dangerous, and that we have to use the tools that we picked up from the 19th century, which are the issues of human rights, right? Of universal suffrage, our ability to vote on these things or not, whether we want them or not. Because at the moment we're seeing completely non-democratic systems, technological systems, and little groups of specialists trying to push these technologies through around the world. So I think it's much more useful to talk about those kinds of technologies, which we saw them in their infancy with things like the Stasi, right? Where you had this
Lives
was
of others.
yes, exactly. We had what 1 in 3 people was an informant within East Germany during the rule of the Stasi. That was a total surveillance state facilitated by the Cold War. We don't want to go back to that experiment in total
Well,
social
although
control.
the difference between the Stasi is that those 1 in 3 chose to be agents of the Stasi. You couldn't do it by accident. Whereas today, it would seem with our digital technology, we're all working for the Stasi, whether we like it or not. Let's so much to talk about you and me. You and I haven't talked for a while. We need to do this more often. Let's end on the new book. Buzz suggests it might be a dystopian fictional classic. It's out this week. Monocle also really loved it, so it's doing well. It's selling very well. A lot of the reviews and the chat about it have talked about your book uncovering, quote unquote, the human. Is that a good word? Is this a word that we should even use when we're thinking, particularly today, about Neuralink technology or AI? Is there such a thing or a word as human? And what does it mean? And is it, in a sense, I guess, the job of writers like yourself, if not to protect it, to certainly write about it?
It's a big and great question, Andrew. I think the role of fiction, I can't remember who it was, it might be Milan Kundera, said that there are all these different disciplines. There's philosophy and there's psychology and there's religion and there's art. And what they're all distinct, but the novel just pulls them all together. And it's a kind of a mess of all these different things: philosophy, psychology, art, and human emotion as well. I think the novel is a fantastic way as a form to ask big questions about why we're alive. I mean, that's one of the things within the story is really the tragedy for Emma, is that this is about a young woman who is troubled by the question of the meaning of life. And her parents are unable to answer it for her. So she, being a bit of a genius, gets involved with Silicon Valley and volunteers to have herself connected to an AI system that she believes will answer the meaning of life, which ultimately ends up killing her. So, I mean, for me, I see that the wonderful human mess. I'm using that word "human" without qualifying it again. The human mess of the novel helps us to understand our own messiness, and I think humans are an unplanned and almost undiagnosable mess of contradictory impulses and needs, and we are stuck on this planet not knowing what we're doing here, and we come up with different narratives to try to explain our own purpose in life. And a few people have said the book really is about someone searching for the meaning of life. And really the tragedy that I'm trying to put forward in the book is that we shouldn't give that big question to computers to answer. We shouldn't ask AI, why are we alive?
Well, we can ask it. We're probably not going to get a
well, yeah, no, true.
And you've written,
we'll get a really cobbled together answer.
Yeah, you've given a lot of thought to our age of anxiety. Lots of books have been written about it. You wrote a piece back in 2022 about whether or not we've overburdened Gen X with fears of the future. It's hard to open a newspaper these days, Ewan, without reading about our anxious age, our anxious generation. Yeah. Is there an intimate connection then between all this new technology and this anxiety? I mean, often lots of books have been written suggesting it's been caused by social media, which now is a rather old-fashioned technology.
That's Jonathan Haidt, right?
Yeah, but will we look back? I mean, I guess it's always the case historically that whenever there's a technological upheaval, the Industrial Revolution was also the same. It's also an age of dramatic anxiety.
Americanitis. That was a disease that people suffered from after the invention of the train. I remember this. People were falling asleep in the streets and overcome with excessive tension due to the quote unquote too fast pace of American life. Yeah. So there is a real adjustment issue for sure. I mean, I think we're facing something new here, though, in as much as I believe that, the way that these new technologies work, they're a bit like a wedge, like a V-shaped wedge, it gets driven down. Imagine two people on either side of the wedge. So it starts off really small. You end up with something like internet dating. It becomes, introduced in the 1990s. I was, a pioneer of that myself. And it becomes...
What, personally or technologically?
Oh, personally. I was not involved in writing the algorithms for it. I was just dating madly. So it starts off, it begins as a novelty, and then people become dependent on it. So by the time you get late millennials, early Generation Z, they then say, well, actually, I don't want to meet anyone outside of using an app because I don't trust anyone. So you get 60, 70% people use dating apps now. So the wedge gets driven in. And then the final stage of that wedge is the replacement of the humans completely by Mark Zuckerberg's AI friends, by AI partners, AI therapists, these human surrogates. So I think we have to look at what stage of the wedge being driven in we're actually at with the technologies that we use, because I'm not sure what the force is behind that that drives the wedge between people. But I do think that part of the problem of the age of anxiety comes from the separation of people caused by technology. The fact that we now use technology for so much. We're mediated by technology in our dealings with other people, and I think it removes that sort of tactile sense, that humorous, trusting, improvisatory, make-do sense that we have when we deal face-to-face with people. For some, it's easier. It's easier to have, an AI friend because it's always going to tell you you're wonderful, and it's always going to, it'll make up a whole bunch of nonsense as well. 48 to 90% of the stuff it says will be, absolute rubbish, but it's gonna try its best according to its algorithms to give you flattering information.
Yeah, I wonder whether the new version of people in America are trying to be like AI. We began with language, we'll end. We talked beginning about a phase shift. You've introduced a new word for me, Ewan. I knew what it meant, but I never thought of it centrally. Wedge.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be talking about a wedge shift or a wedge moment in our species' history. We certainly need our novelists like Ewan Morrison. His new book is out already, both in the US and the UK. For Emma. Supposed to be a masterpiece. Well done, Ewan. You better go back to your drawing board, continue on the masterpieces. We need novelists like you, wordsmiths. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been great speaking to you again.